And he looked at me and he said, there's no gentle way to cut somebody's head off.
Yeah, well, I know a phrase like that too. If you have to cut the tail off a cat, you don't do it an inch at a time.
Welcome back to Hero Journey. Today's topic is a good one, and it's one of the most important factors in determining what your life feels like, and based on how you apply it can either make your relationships a whole lot better or a whole lot worse. Today, we're going to be watching some clips from a recent conversation between Jordan Peterson and Chris Voss, who was a lead FBI hostage negotiator, and he has some fantastic work. If you're interested in learning about how to communicate more effectively, strongly recommend checking him out. In their conversation, they talk for over 90 minutes about negotiation, and then right in the middle of it, Chris pivots for a little bit into this little side topic. He brings up the question of what happens when you don't confront or address the issues in your life. And then JP picks up on it and runs with it, and what follows is gold. And I will say this again, this is one of the fundamental principles of living a good story, so pay attention to this one.
There's calibrated questions, what and how questions that are designed to cause somebody to think about somebody. I might say, in order, instead of me saying to you, like, look, you got to take action because the status quo is killing you. Instead of, if I want to put that thought in your head, I'm going to say, what happens if you do nothing? How are you better off by failing to address this problem? You know, those are two different questions designed to uncover the same thing, which is pointing out to you the comfort of inaction. I think Kennedy made some statement about that. The long-range consequences of comfortable inaction far outweigh addressing the problem.
That's an absolutely crucial point.
That Kennedy quote is, there are risks and costs to action, but they are far less than the long-range risks of comfortable inaction. And this is right. Most of us give far more thought and attention to the presumed or perceived risks of taking a specific action than we do of the risks of not taking that action. This is a common logical fallacy. It's called the omission bias or the status quo bias. It's the assumption that doing nothing is less risky than doing something. And it essentially has three flaws. Number one, it minimizes the negative impact of the current state of affairs. Number two, it minimizes the potential positive upside or impact of taking that action. And then three, and maybe this is most crucial to understand, it assumes that by doing nothing, things will just stay the way that they are now and not get any worse. But that's not how life works, and that's not how people work. In the real world, things deteriorate without care and attention. And if you've been in any type of long-term relationship, you know that that's true. What we're talking about here is the fundamental principle of attending to the things in our sphere of influence well, regardless of how much we don't want to attend to them. When you have a problem in your marriage or an issue at work, you think to yourself, okay, so I have this issue. What are the risks I'm taking by opening up this can of worms? I don't want to cause unnecessary drama or conflict. So maybe you just let it go. And maybe you say to yourself, like, look, man, lighten up. It's not that big of a deal. It doesn't really matter. And maybe it is a small thing that you can live with and it really doesn't matter. But maybe it does matter. Maybe it's something that needs to be addressed, or you're going to become resentful, or it's going to develop into a larger issue with bigger and more negative consequences for you and for the relationship. And by ignoring it or by avoiding the conflict, what you're doing is you're allowing that issue to grow. It's like throwing a pile of wet towels in the corner. They're not just going to go away. They're going to turn nasty, and then pretty soon the whole house smells musty. We call this running from the dragon. The issues that you ignore or that you run away from, they don't just go away, they get bigger. More on this later. Okay, in this next clip, Jordan is going to reference the Big Five model of personality. And if you're not familiar with this model, it is an incredibly helpful tool that I highly recommend. If you want me to do a video breaking down this model, let me know in the comments.
And this is an impediment to negotiation in marital relationships constantly. And it's an absolute killer. You know, like, I don't like conflict, but I learned something a long time ago. And I learned that conflict delayed was conflict continued and multiplied. And so if I have an issue with my wife, I would rather, you know, I read a paper yesterday. I really liked this paper. It was really smart. They were doing fMRI scanning, looking at activation of pain systems in relationship to other people's pain. And there's quite a variability in that. So people high in trait agreeableness who are easy to get along with and who are sympathetic and empathetic, but who can be easily taken advantage of, by the way. That's one end of the distribution. The other end is disagreeable people who can be callous and hurtful, blunt. Now, somewhat disagreeable managers, by the way, are more successful. And many people who seek therapy are agreeable people who are being taken advantage of. So the fact that you're empathetic and sympathetic is not a virtue without its vices or dangers. The brain research revealed that the more empathic people had a larger degree of pain activation in the pain systems when they saw the pain of other people. Okay, so now if you don't like conflict, part of the reason you don't like conflict is because if you see the person you're having conflict with in pain, you're going to mirror that pain. So that's uncomfortable. And I'm an agreeable person. So if I see someone in pain, it strikes me to the core. But I learned that if I deferred conflict, then it's like the cat with its tail being cut off an inch at a time. It's like we don't have the blowout, and so we're minimizing the pain in the present, but we're radically prolonging it across our iterated interactions. And so it's much better just to call a spade and to say, look, I see the elephant under the rug. I see the snake's tail, poking out from the cabinet. We're going to sort this out right here and now. And we're going to straighten it out. And that's going to be delving into the depths. And there's going to be discomfort in that. But if we can identify the problem and negotiate a compelling mutual solution, we don't have to have this problem anymore. And man, it's such a, I saw couples all the time who had the same bloody fight every day for 30 years. It's just, that's hell. And it's much better just to have like the discussion, even though that's that inaction, that you pointed to, that you described Kennedy as pointing to. It's the, classically speaking, even theologically, there is much more stress placed on sins of commission, right? Things you do that are clearly wrong, but avoiding doing something right, that does people in, man, especially if they do that repeatedly, and they do it because they don't want to cause trouble, because they want to avoid conflict. It's like, there's no avoiding necessary conflict.
It's a downward spiral.
This is so key. You're not avoiding risk, you're prolonging it. I loved what Peterson said here. If we can identify the problem and negotiate a compelling mutual solution, we don't have this problem anymore. It's such a helpful way to think about relationships. So here's something to think about. If it sucks for you, it probably sucks for them too. So you can ignore the problem in a relationship, which means that ultimately what you're doing is condemning both of you to a suboptimal relationship. Or you can decide, you know what? I want optimal. And then so you address the situation, the issue in such a way that is collaborative and communicates to both parties, hey, I'm not bringing this up to judge you or to assert my will over you. I'm bringing it up so that we can both have a better time here. You're making the issue the enemy, not your partner. And now you're on the same team and you've placed the issue out in front of you. And then you can collaborate on a solution together. And maybe you can negotiate or collaborate on a solution that's better for both parties than what either of you had in mind in the beginning. And now look what you've done. You have turned an obstacle into an affordance. You've used something that was adverse to you to your advantage, and now you're moving forward. You've grown, you've leveled up, and you've done that together, which means that your relationship is stronger. So far, we've been focusing on the negative effects to the relationship of not addressing the issue, but now we're going to pivot and focus on the negative effects to you.
One of the things we would do is say, okay, think about how you feel about the situation you're in right now. Okay, now imagine yourself 10 years older. You're in the same position. Okay, except you're 10 years older.
10 years older, yeah.
You bet, man. You've put yourself through an awful lot of misery for 10 years. You're weaker because you've backed off, right? You're more bitter. You're more hopeless. You're suffering from more pain. Like, think about that. Like, empathize with that future person and tell me what you do in the present to avoid that fate. People would think, oh my God, that's the last thing I want. Because everyone thinks, well, I'll deal with it tomorrow. But you can say, well, yeah, you haven't dealt with it for the last 5 years. And how's that gone for you? Like, would it have been better if you would have dealt with it 5 years ago? And now, stretch that out 10 years into the future. See, because it's such an interesting thing to do, because the person has this impediment of the conflict in front of them that's causing them to be afraid. And what you do is you swing that behind them. It's like getting the devil behind them. Get thee behind me, Satan, I think is the right word. It's like,
Right.
This is the thing you're afraid of. But you should have a different fear pushing you forward that's way more profound. And that would be the fear of the consequences of inaction.
I love this. Peterson here is hinting at the idea of a spiritual dimension to your being. Listen, you're not just a machine who receives input and delivers output. You have emotions, you have longings, you have a soul that can evolve or it can stagnate. So let's do the exercise that Peterson is talking about here. Think about yourself 10 years from now. Now imagine that whatever issues are facing you now, they're still there, only they're worse because you haven't addressed them. And then now also you're weaker because you've let them be scary for so long that you've handed over your strength to them. And you have spent 10 years of your life living with these issues that make you miserable. So now your life has been textured with this negativity. Now imagine yourself 10 years from now and imagine that those issues are gone. You've done the hard work in identifying and addressing and negotiating them. You've made sacrifices, potentially made some compromises, but you've grown, you've ushered in new opportunities, and you've taken advantage of them. And now your life is much more enjoyable, and you're stronger and you're more integrated. Which version of your life would you rather have? This is a no-brainer. This exercise of envisioning different futures is one that I do on a daily basis, and it helps keep me moving in directions that are good. Okay, we've got one more clip here to end on a positive note. We're going to pick up on a point where Chris is describing the importance of getting clear on what the issue is, on identifying it, labeling it, describing it to yourself. And I want to pick up on what Jordan says here in response.
That simply describing negativity diminished it every time. Now, the degree it diminishes, it changes, but it diminishes describing it, labeling it, calling it out, not denying it, not explaining it, just describing it, always moves you closer to the deal, always. Now, how much it moves you...
Partly it's because, partly what happens is that, imagine you're being chased by something. One of the reasons you're afraid of it is because you observe yourself running. Now imagine you turn around and face it. You've instantly signaled to yourself that you have faith in the part of you that's looking at the problem. And that will immediately produce positive emotion and diminish negative emotion. It's unbelievably reliable. And the psychophysiological transformation is systemic. Like, it's been mapped literally from the level of DNA upward. So there's a complete, it's like you're inhabited by a different spirit when you're running from something that's chasing you and when you turn around to confront it.
When we allow ourselves to be inhabited by the spirit of fear, it takes our power and it robs us of our true identity. When you step forward in courage to address the issues that are in front of you, they get smaller and you get larger in proportion. You become stronger, more integrated, and you live more into your calling of being a mediator between heaven and earth, between the transcendent and the immanent. In a fundamental way, this is what Hero Journey is all about. It's about orienting yourself towards a good that transcends the material world, orienting yourself towards a positive vision of the future with faith and hope and courage, and then working with all of yourself online in that direction, regardless of what stands in your path. Alrighty, folks, that's it for today. If you enjoyed this video and you got some value out of it, please subscribe below and follow along. We're going to have a lot more of these types of conversations coming right around the corner. Till next time, stay on that narrow path. Godspeed.